Every pro engineer will have their own unique approach to gluing a vocal track in the mix, and one of the best in the industry at doing this is Greg Wells. So in this video, I'm going to be taking a deep dive into his vocal mixing approach, breaking down his use of compression, delays, and more, so that you can implement these unique ideas into your own workflow. But to do this, we need to first break these ideas down into 3 sections. Part 1 will be covering Greg's use of compression and his specific 1176 settings that he's used on countless hit records over the years. Part 2 will cover his method of applying effects to a vocal and the shared approaches he's learned from working with other pro engineers like Chris Lord-Alge and Spike Stent. And lastly, part 3 will cover a really cool way of using both mono and stereo delays that before researching this video, I'd never actually heard of before. But before we start, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I recommend checking out Sage Audio's Mixing and Mastering membership. As a member, I have to say the experience is incredible. Just for signing up, you receive 10 free mastered songs per month with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University for in-depth mixing and mastering courses. But more on that at the end of the video. So to start with, let's go over Greg's approach to vocal compression and how he uses it to glue vocals into a mix. In the past, Greg has said that he's a big fan of using the 1176 compressor on almost every vocal he records. This unit is well known for its aggressive, punchy sound, which makes sense really, as a key component to so many of his productions is that upfront, energetic vocal sound, which, aside from the performance itself, you could really only get out of using that style of compression. Along with using this compressor, he generally sticks to using the exact same settings each time, which I'll be sharing with you shortly. He's also said to be a big proponent of using serial compression to help further enhance a vocal track. Using compressors in series is a technique whereby you apply 2 or more compressors to the same vocal, each performing a different job. So a good way to explain this would be if you had an audio source that was 1, very pokey and you needed to tame the initial transient, and 2, you wanted to emphasize the area directly after this transient to bring out the sustain in your track. A really easy way to hear this is on something short and snappy, like a snare drum. So first, listen to how it sounds without compression. And now, with the first compressor applied, which is going to tame that initial pokey transient. And finally, with a second compressor added on to help emphasize the sustain of the snare, affecting the area just after the initial transient. So taking this concept and applying this to vocals, as Greg does, will help you to achieve a consistent, glowy sound, because you're able to tame the harder transients that will naturally occur in any vocal recording, whilst also being able to bring out the sustain of a vocal, leaving you with a consistent and upfront sound. Now, as I mentioned, Greg tends to opt for an 1176 compressor to handle most of his vocals, and he said previously how he likes to keep the same settings, where possible, from song to song. These settings being the slowest attack and fastest release on this unit, which on an 1176 would mean setting the attack control at 1 and the release control at 7. A lot of people may not know that the settings on an 1176 are actually backwards to most compressors. You typically expect the fastest setting to be all the way to the left and the slowest to the right. However, it's reversed on this compressor. So just keep that in mind, as you could easily get the settings the wrong way around here. So if we apply this setting to a vocal that only has a small amount of EQ before it, you'll quickly hear just how much this one effect and these specific settings will get you to that polished, Greg Wells-like vocal sound.
Guess you left a mark on me like a tattoo. You're writing all my songs, didn't ask you. Guess you left a mark on me like a tattoo. You're writing all my songs, didn't ask you.
One insight that I felt was really valuable from listening to interviews with Greg Wells is how he talked about noticing the way other top mixing engineers would apply vocal effects in a mix. Going on to say how when they paused playback, he'd hear all the different reverbs and delays that were going on in the background of a mix during these moments. But then when restarting playback, they were almost unnoticeable in the full mix. And I think this is a huge difference that will quickly separate a beginner sounding mix from a professional one. It's not the fact that pro engineers don't use these effects, it's just that they implement them in a way where they're more often felt rather than being heard. Now, a great way of doing this is to process the actual effects rather than just applying them to your tracks. So let's run through some examples of this so you can get a better understanding of what I mean. Let's first take reverb, for example. Most beginners would probably want to apply this directly to a track and then just leave it at that. While this could be fine in certain cases, more often than not, it's going to lead to a washed out, muddy sounding mix. The reason being is that reverbs often contain a huge amount of frequency content, most of which isn't going to be necessary in your mix. So to deal with this, you can approach a reverb in a similar way to which you'd process an untreated vocal track by using EQ and compression. Here I have a duplicated copy of my vocal track, with a reverb applied to it, and the mix knob set at 100% wet. I've soloed this out so that we're only hearing the reverb at the moment, which will make things easier to process. So first, let's listen to this reverb and see what needs altering. You probably noticed it has a ton of low end, which isn't really going to be necessary, as I'd rather keep this area clean for the unaffected vocal track to occupy. So applying the post EQ to this reverb is going to help clean up the sound. If you look at the analyzer, you can see all of this low end rumble, which we can definitely get rid of to help clean things up. So we can apply a high pass filter here to cut out this unnecessary low end, along with reducing some of the mids around 600 Hz, as this is a common muddy sounding area. Lastly, a low pass filter to cut out some of the high end around the 12K region, which will do the inverse of what the high pass filter is doing, giving extra room for the original vocal to occupy the high frequency area. So now let's listen to the reverb along with the original unaffected vocal track, and you can hear how much this EQ helps to clean up the reverb effect. And we can even take this one step further by applying some compression to the EQ'd reverb, which will help smooth things out and achieve more of that felt not heard effect that Greg Wells was talking about. So here I'm opting to use an LA2A style compressor, as it's great for smoothing out any audio signal you feed it. And I'm just gently compressing things here, as I don't want the reverb to sound too aggressive, but rather just a more controlled sound to what we have now. So aiming for around -5 dB in gain reduction on this compressor will get you that smoother sound. So let's do one final comparison, with the first example being the unprocessed reverb, and the second one with the EQ and compression applied to it. The final takeaway I want to share with you is one way Greg Wells likes to set up his delay effects, and this is to use both a stereo delay along with a mono delay. So the stereo delay is a ping-pong style roll-off that helps to give you that 3D vocal effect, along with another mono delay set in the center that helps to add depth to the lead vocal track. These combined again add to that sense of sound manipulation, where the vocal feels more glued and centered, but not so obvious that a listener could easily pinpoint exactly what they're hearing. So here's a setup for a Greg Wells style vocal delay. First, you'll need a plugin with a ping-pong setting for the stereo effect. This means that it will bounce the signal from left to right instead of remaining static like a regular delay would. So a lot of delays will have this built in, and you just need to press this button to activate it. The second crucial step here is to make sure you roll off a lot of the high and low end, as you don't want this stereo effect to remain at full frequency. It'll sit better in the mix and stand out less if it's more lo-fi in nature. So as you can hear, I've taken both the highs and lows off somewhat, giving this cool ping-pong roll-off sound.
I take a walk at night, stare at city lights.
And the final piece of this puzzle is to create a mono delay to complete the stereo field. We want to again use a rolled off sound so that it doesn't clash with the lead vocal and sits nicely within the mix. We should sound something like this.
I take a walk at night, stare at city lights.
So let's do one final comparison here, the first being a regular stereo delay, and the second is a Greg Wells styled delay.
I take a walk at night, stare at city lights. I take a walk at night, stare at city lights.
As I mentioned earlier, if you want to get your mixes to sound like professional songs, I encourage you to check out Sage Audio's Mixing and Mastering membership. As a member, I have to say the experience is incredible. Just for signing up, you receive 10 pre-mastered songs per month, with your own dedicated mastering engineer, unlimited mixing feedback, and access to Sage Audio University mixing and mastering courses, which include start-to-finish walkthrough sessions for various genres and 35 multi-track sessions for hands-on practice. This platform is supported by their thriving community and tight-knit network of audio engineers. Every day I see and hear great wins in the membership from both new and seasoned engineers, noticing a huge improvement in their mixes and masters after joining. Right now, you can join the membership with a 70% lifetime discount, bringing the cost down to just $15 per month. So join today and start creating mixes that sound like professional songs.